They called it a failure, a $1 billion firework. But what they missed was the master plan already in motion. This wasn't an explosion, it was a smokescreen. While the world was focused on the fireball, SpaceX was quietly executing the greatest heist in the history of science, stealing the future of space exploration itself out from under the noses of every government and billionaire on Earth. And they did it by breaking the one rule every other space agency thought was sacred. Picture this. It's 2002, and the most exclusive club in the world has only two members. For decades, only the United States and Russia held the keys to human spaceflight. NASA's budget? Over $20 billion annually. Russia's space program? Backed by the full might of a nuclear superpower. These weren't just organizations. They were empires built on Cold War competition and national pride. Then, out of nowhere, a South African entrepreneur who made his fortune selling online payment systems walks into this exclusive club and announces he's going to Mars. The established powers laughed. Who was this Elon Musk character? What could a startup possibly accomplish that governments with unlimited resources and 5 decades of experience couldn't? The space industry was a fortress, impenetrable, expensive, and reserved for nations, not individuals. But here's the thing about fortresses. Sometimes, the most audacious plan is simply walking through the front door. What you're about to witness isn't just a business story. It's the greatest heist in modern history. Except instead of gold or diamonds, the prize was something far more valuable: the future of human civilization among the stars. This is the story of how a scrappy company named SpaceX didn't just challenge the space establishment. They completely rewrote the rules of the game. In less than 2 decades, SpaceX has accomplished what seemed impossible. They've made rockets reusable, slashed launch costs by 90%, and turned what was once a government monopoly into a competitive marketplace. But perhaps most remarkably, they've made us believe again that humanity's destiny lies beyond Earth. So how did they do it? How did a company that didn't exist in the year 2000 manage to outmaneuver institutions that had been launching rockets since the 1950s? How did they crack a code that had stumped engineers for generations? The answer lies in understanding that sometimes the greatest revolutions don't come from within the establishment. They come from those bold enough to tear it down and build something entirely new. This is the story of the ultimate space heist. To understand the magnitude of what SpaceX accomplished, we need to go back to where it all began. The Cold War, when space wasn't about exploration, it was about survival. October 4th, 1957. The Soviet Union launches Sputnik, and suddenly the ultimate high ground isn't a mountain or a building, it's orbit itself. The message was clear: whoever controlled space could control the world. This wasn't science fiction anymore. This was national security. For the next 3 decades, space became the ultimate government monopoly. NASA emerged as America's answer to Soviet dominance, backed by virtually unlimited funding and the brightest minds money could recruit. The Apollo program alone consumed over 4% of the entire federal budget at its peak, the equivalent of over $200 billion in today's money. The rules were simple. Space was too important, too dangerous, and too expensive for anyone except governments. Private companies? They could build components, sure, but actually launching rockets? That was reserved for the big players: NASA, Roscosmos, the European Space Agency. The barrier to entry wasn't just high, it was astronomical. Consider the technology involved. A single space shuttle mission required over 2.5 million parts working in perfect harmony. The fuel alone for one launch cost more than most companies' annual revenue. And if something went wrong, the consequences weren't just financial. They were measured in human lives and national prestige. This created what economists call a natural monopoly. The costs were so high, the risks so enormous, and the expertise so specialized that it simply made no economic sense for private companies to compete. Why would they? The government was already doing the job, and doing it well enough to put humans on the moon. By the 1990s, this system seemed permanent. NASA had the space shuttle, Russia had their proven Soyuz capsules, And emerging space powers like China and India were following the same government-controlled model. The space industry had calcified into a predictable rhythm. Governments set the missions, contractors built the hardware, and costs just kept going up. Launch prices were treated like utilities, necessary expenses that would naturally increase over time. A single shuttle mission cost nearly $1 billion. Getting 1 kilogram of payload to orbit? That'll be about $20,000, thank you very much. Take it or leave it. This was the fortress SpaceX was preparing to storm. Impregnable, expensive, and protected by decades of, "That's just how things are done." But fortresses have a weakness. They're built to keep out the enemies they expect. The year was 2001, and Elon Musk had just sold PayPal to eBay for $1.5 billion. Most people in his position would buy an island, maybe a sports team, perhaps dabble in some safe investments. Instead, Musk did something that made his friends question his sanity. He decided to spend his fortune on rockets. But this wasn't just about building rockets. This was about something far more audacious. Musk had become obsessed with a terrifying realization. Humanity was stuck on one planet, vulnerable to any number of extinction-level events. Asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, nuclear war. Any of these could end human civilization in an instant. We needed a backup plan, and that backup plan was Mars. The problem? Getting to Mars with existing technology would cost hundreds of billions of dollars. NASA's own estimates for a Mars mission were so astronomical that they might as well have been theoretical. So Musk approached this like any good entrepreneur. If the product is too expensive, you don't abandon the dream. You figure out how to make it cheaper. In 2002, he founded Space Exploration Technologies Corporation, SpaceX. The mission statement was simple: reduce space transportation costs to enable the colonization of Mars. The execution? That would prove to be anything but simple. Musk's plan was audacious in its apparent simplicity. Instead of accepting that rockets were expensive, he asked a different question. Why are they expensive? The answer seemed obvious. Because you throw them away after every use. Imagine if airlines had to build a new Boeing 747 for every flight. That's essentially what the space industry had been doing for 50 years. So SpaceX set out to build the world's first truly reusable orbital rocket. The establishment's response was swift and predictable. Impossible. NASA had tried reusability with the space shuttle and discovered it was actually more expensive than disposable rockets. The physics were too challenging, the engineering too complex. The economics simply didn't work. But Musk had something the establishment didn't: the freedom to fail. He wasn't beholden to congressional budgets or public opinion. If a rocket exploded, he could learn from it and try again. And explode they did. The first Falcon 1 rocket failed. Then, the second one failed. Then, the third one failed. Each failure cost millions of dollars and brought SpaceX closer to bankruptcy. By 2008, the company was down to its last rocket and its last shot. Employees were taking pay cuts, suppliers were demanding cash up front, and industry experts were writing SpaceX's obituary. This was Musk's all-or-nothing moment. Everything he'd built, every dollar he'd invested, every dream he'd harbored about making humanity a multi-planetary species, it all came down to one rocket, sitting on a launch pad in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The heist was about to begin. September 28th, 2008. On a tiny atoll called Omelek Island, 2,500 miles southwest of Hawaii, SpaceX's fourth Falcon, one rocket stood ready for what everyone knew was a make-or-break moment. The company had exactly enough money left for this one attempt. Success meant survival. Failure meant the end of Elon Musk's space dreams and the vindication of every expert who said private companies had no business in space. At 4:15 p.m. Pacific time, the Falcon 1 ignited and rose into the sky. For 9 agonizing minutes, SpaceX employees held their breath as their rocket climbed higher than any privately built rocket had ever gone. Then, finally, the words everyone had been waiting for. "We have reached orbit." In that moment, SpaceX became the first privately funded company to successfully launch a liquid-fueled rocket into Earth orbit. But this wasn't just a technical achievement. It was a philosophical breakthrough. The fortress walls had been breached. The success of Falcon 1 proved something revolutionary. You didn't need a government budget to reach space. You didn't need decades of institutional knowledge. What you needed was fresh thinking, rapid iteration, and the willingness to challenge every assumption about how things had always been done. But Musk wasn't content with just reaching orbit. He wanted to dominate it. The Falcon 1 was just the warm-up act. The real show was the Falcon 9, a rocket powerful enough to carry serious payloads and sophisticated enough to land itself. This is where SpaceX's approach became truly revolutionary. While traditional aerospace companies spent years in design committees, SpaceX embraced a test early, test often philosophy. They built rockets quickly, launched them, learned from the results, and iterated rapidly. Each failure wasn't a setback. It was data. The Falcon 9's development process was unlike anything the space industry had ever seen. Instead of the typical decade-long development cycle, SpaceX compressed their timeline to just a few years. They used modern manufacturing techniques, commercial off-the-shelf components where possible, and a flat organizational structure that allowed engineers to make decisions quickly. Most importantly, they designed the Falcon 9 from the ground up to be reusable. Not partially reusable like the space shuttle, which required months of refurbishment between flights, but truly reusable, capable of landing, being refueled, and flying again within weeks. The first Falcon 9 launched on June 4, 2010, and successfully placed a dummy payload into orbit. But the real breakthrough came with the pricing. SpaceX announced they could launch payloads for $56 million, less than half the cost of their nearest competitor. Suddenly, space access wasn't just for government agencies with unlimited budgets. Commercial companies, universities, even small nations could afford to launch satellites. The vault door was now wide open, and SpaceX was walking away with the treasure. Affordable, reliable access to space. December 21, 2015, Cape Canaveral, Florida. As the sun set over the Atlantic, a Falcon 9 rocket lifted off, carrying 11 commercial satellites. This was becoming routine for SpaceX. Another successful launch, another satisfied customer. But what happened next would change everything. Instead of the first stage falling into the ocean like every rocket in history, something extraordinary occurred. The 14-story tall booster began firing its engines to slow its descent, deployed landing legs like some science fiction spacecraft, and touched down gently on a concrete pad just 6 miles from where it had launched 10 minutes earlier. The SpaceX control room erupted. Engineers who had been told their entire careers that this was impossible were watching their impossible dream happen in real time. Elon Musk himself was nearly in tears. After years of spectacular failures, boosters exploding on barges, narrow misses, and crushing near successes, they had finally cracked the code. But why was this so revolutionary? The answer lies in the economics of space travel. Imagine if every time you flew across the country, the airline had to build a new airplane and throw it away after landing. That's essentially what the space industry had been doing since 1957. A single Falcon 9 rocket cost about $60 million to build, but the fuel for one flight? Only $200,000. By recovering and reusing the first stage, SpaceX could theoretically reduce launch costs by 90%. This wasn't just an improvement. It was a complete transformation of the economics of space access. Suddenly, missions that were previously too expensive became viable. Satellite constellations that would have cost billions could be launched for millions. The traditional aerospace industry was stunned. Companies like United Launch Alliance had been charging the U.S. government over $400 million per launch for their Atlas V rockets. SpaceX was now offering similar capability for less than $70 million, and their costs were still dropping. More importantly, SpaceX proved that innovation in the space industry was possible. For decades, rocket technology had remained essentially unchanged. The engines powering NASA's new Space Launch System rocket are based on designs from the 1970s. SpaceX showed that with fresh thinking and modern technology, you could achieve what had been considered impossible. This was SpaceX's masterstroke, not just stealing market share from the established players, but fundamentally rewriting the rules of the game. They hadn't just built a better rocket, they had built a better way of thinking about rockets. The heist was no longer about breaking into the vault. SpaceX was now walking away with the entire treasure, leaving their competitors to wonder how they had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. The most delicious irony in the entire SpaceX story came in 2008, just months after that crucial fourth Falcon 1 success. NASA, the same organization whose monopoly SpaceX was systematically dismantling, awarded the upstart company a $1.6 billion contract to carry cargo to the International Space Station. Think about that for a moment. The institution that had dominated space for half a century was now paying the company that was disrupting them to do their job. It was like a bank hiring the very thieves who had just robbed their vault to provide security services. This wasn't charity, it was desperation. NASA was facing a crisis. The Space Shuttle program was ending in 2011, and the replacement, the Constellation program, was billions over budget and years behind schedule. America was about to lose its ability to send astronauts to space independently, forced to buy seats on Russian Soyuz rockets for $80 million each. NASA needed options, and SpaceX had become their most promising bet. The Commercial Orbital Transportation Services Program, or COTS, represented a fundamental shift in how NASA operated. Instead of the traditional cost-plus contracts where companies were guaranteed payment regardless of performance, NASA was now paying for results. SpaceX would only get paid if they successfully delivered cargo to the space station. SpaceX's Dragon capsule first reached the ISS in 2012, making history as the first commercial spacecraft to dock with the station. But the real breakthrough came in 2020, when SpaceX's Crew Dragon successfully carried NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley to the ISS, the first time humans had launched from American soil in 9 years. The symbolism was powerful. SpaceX hadn't just challenged NASA's monopoly. They had become essential to NASA's mission. The disruptor had become the establishment's lifeline. This success opened floodgates. Commercial satellite operators who had been paying premium prices for launches on government rockets suddenly had an alternative. Universities could afford to launch research missions. Startups could deploy satellite constellations. The democratization of space access was accelerating. SpaceX's launch manifest grew from a few missions per year to over 30 annual flights. They were launching more rockets than some entire countries. The company that had struggled to achieve a single successful orbital flight was now responsible for more than half of all global launch activity. But perhaps most tellingly, NASA began changing its own approach. The agency started embracing commercial partnerships, rapid development cycles, and the kind of innovative thinking that SpaceX had pioneered. The student was teaching the teacher. The heist was complete, but SpaceX wasn't done. The real prize was still waiting on another planet entirely. All of this, the reusable rockets, the cost reductions, the market disruption, was never the end goal. It was all just preparation for Elon Musk's ultimate objective, making humanity a multi-planetary species by establishing a self-sustaining city on Mars. This is where the SpaceX story transcends business and enters the realm of human destiny. Every successful Falcon 9 landing, every Dragon mission to the ISS, every satellite constellation deployed, they're all stepping stones toward a much grander vision. Mars represents the ultimate prize in Musk's space heist. Not just the red planet itself, but what it represents: the survival of human consciousness beyond Earth. In Musk's worldview, life on Earth is fragile, vulnerable to any number of catastrophic events. Mars offers a backup drive for human civilization. But getting to Mars with traditional space technology would cost trillions of dollars and take centuries to develop. SpaceX's approach is characteristically audacious. Build the biggest, most powerful rocket ever created, make it fully reusable, and mass-produce flights to Mars like airlines mass-produce flights to Paris. Enter Starship, a gleaming steel rocket that stands 400 feet tall and is designed to carry 100 tons of cargo to Mars. More importantly, it's designed to be refueled in orbit and make the return journey, turning Mars colonization from a suicide mission into a commuter route. The economics are staggering. Traditional estimates for Mars missions range from $500 billion to $1 trillion. SpaceX believes they can reduce the cost of sending a ton of cargo to Mars to under $10 million, a reduction of nearly 99%. This isn't just about sending a few astronauts to plant flags and collect rocks. This is about establishing the first human settlement on another world, complete with life support systems, manufacturing capabilities, and eventually, the ability to sustain itself without support from Earth. If successful, SpaceX won't just have stolen the space race, they'll have stolen the future itself. Of course, SpaceX's success didn't go unnoticed. The space industry that had been sleeping for decades suddenly woke up to find their lunch had been stolen, and they scrambled to respond. Jeff Bezos launched Blue Origin with the motto, "Gradationally, then suddenly," a more methodical approach to reusable rockets. Traditional contractors like Boeing and Lockheed Martin formed United Launch Alliance, trying to compete on reliability rather than cost. China accelerated their space program, viewing SpaceX's success as a national security threat. But here's the thing about being first to market with a revolutionary technology. Everyone else is playing catch-up, while competitors spent years developing their own reusable rockets. SpaceX was already iterating to their third generation of Falcon 9, perfecting their landing techniques and building a massive constellation of Starlink satellites. The security guards were finally responding to the alarm, but the vault had already been emptied. SpaceX had stolen not just market share, but the entire momentum of human space exploration. So here we are, more than 2 decades after a PayPal millionaire decided to spend his fortune on rockets. SpaceX has fundamentally transformed space access, made reusable rockets routine, and turned Mars colonization from science fiction into engineering challenge. But was this really a heist? Or was it something else entirely? Perhaps SpaceX didn't steal the space race. Perhaps they liberated it. They took space exploration out of the hands of bureaucrats and gave it back to dreamers, entrepreneurs, and visionaries. They proved that the future doesn't belong to institutions, but to those bold enough to reimagine what's possible. The greatest heist in history wasn't about taking something away. It was about giving something back to humanity. Hope that our best days among the stars still lie ahead.
This is Beyond Revealed. Subscribe now and join us as we explore the mysteries that lie within our world and far beyond.